Are there any questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Jane White from Health Affairs. We launched a blog about 11 years ago with very similar kind of goals to Mizan, where most of the content is commissioned, but we do now, because it's been going for so long, get unsolicited material. And in fact, we've even moved to the point where we're a health policy journal and blog, and we've moved to the point where things that are being submitted to the journal, we even triage now to know this is not appropriate for the journal, but it is for the blog, and we send it over to the blog team. But my question for you would be, how do you handle peer review of blog? Because we do not do formal peer review, even though this is scholarly content. It's more of a policy bent, so it's policy proposals, it's trial balloons, it's ideas about policy making, and when we've not been peer reviewing our blog content.
The super simple answer to this is that the journal is peer reviewed, but the other material is not.
Oh, I thought I misunderstood.
All of the
you.
material, so Project and Pop are commissioned.
They're commissioned but not peer reviewed.
Commissioned but not peer reviewed, and then journal is explicitly and specific, you know, with a transparent process, like double blind and all of that stuff. And actually, I felt like
I misheard.
no, and I have to say, I feel like I really arrived because just like last week, the post that I published literally yesterday came to me from a very prominent scholar of Islamic art who I've been meaning to reach out to and just have never gotten around to it. And she got in touch with me saying, hey, I've got this thing, will you publish it? And we had exactly that conversation where I said, thanks so much, I'm a big fan, blah, 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 all that nonsense. And I said, is it your intention that this be go into the journal and be peer reviewed, or are you just giving this to us for project? And she said, I have plenty of peer reviewed stuff. My number one, and I've just been promoted to full professor, my number one goal is to reach a larger audience and to devote myself more to public scholarship. So she was very aware of the scale. And she had done shorter pieces for Jadaliyya. Jadaliyya is like a more newsy current affairs thing on the Middle East. This was a little bit, I think she hopefully successfully conceived of this as like, oh, this is a step up. Like Mizan is like more for posterity. This is where I do the long form thing, but it's not quite up to that level of the peer review journal.
Right, and if I could add a follow on, we've experienced the same thing when it's often people that are more established in their field that are willing to write for the blog initially, although now that the blog has taken off, and just in this last quarter, our blog page views have surpassed our journal page views.
Oh,
but
wow.
it may have something to do with Trump and healthcare reform.
Right. Sure.
So that's probably partly why the page views are so high right now. We publish every 3 or 4 times a day on the blog. But we are in the midst of moving to a new platform where all our content, including journal and blog, will be on the same platform, really, out of home. And we are going to give our blogs DOIs. We do not right now. And we are looking very much, our blogs are cited. Actually, we see them get cited in journal articles. So we are very much interested in how this is going to play out, and do we need to bring some measure of peer review to some of this content for it to get cited more readily? So anyways, there's some of the questions.
Yeah.
So we're exploring as well.
Yes, please.
As someone who's a librarian and not a scientist at all by any means, my question is, and I've gone to a few other discussions that haven't talked about blogs specifically, but have talked about the credibility or scholarly nature of certain publications. And I'm wondering, I think that there's a distinction between citing something, at least in my head, and the determination of whether or not it's scholarly. But it seems like in this group, the two ideas are kind of conflated together. And so just because you cite something doesn't mean that it's scholarly? Probably not. I mean, I could write a blog and someone could cite it, even though I know nothing about anything. I guess that's what I'm asking.
Okay,
Is there like
so-
is that part of the issue with
Well, let me
doing this?
let me give you a little bit of background on the scholarly blog database, because we've indexed the number of the folks who are here. We don't just pick a blog. The blog, all of the blogs go through a multi-step editorial and curation process. So we hire researchers with domain expertise. So the first thing they do is say, is this blog on physics or astrophysics, is it good? Is the content good? Or in chemistry, or in the classics. So we have domain expertise folks who are out there. They tend to be grad students, postdocs, who have a little bit of time trying to get their reputation, but they know the literature really well. PhD moms, without being sexist, PhD moms, are going to deal with babies, and then they want to do something intellectual. So that's the first cut. And then we check the credentials of the person who wrote the blog to make sure that, as part of our insurance, is they have a degree in what they're writing about, so that there's some credibility. We like to say that it's credentialed social media. And then we bring in all their social connections. And then we have librarians who actually look at collections in different cohorts. Everything gets at least one, mostly two LC classifications. So we try to curate and balance that because we're selecting across all academic disciplines. So it's not, and then the content, in the life sciences particularly, there are developments that happen every 4 to 6 months. And so the research is very, very competitive. And we won't see original work there. We won't see original work in many blogs. It tends to be more opinion and commentary, which means they're more of a teaching tool than they are a research tool, although they are a research tool if somebody is commenting on something and makes references to other material. It can be a source of prior art for somebody who's doing some investigation. So it's sort of a different way of looking at, well, what's the use of this? It's accessible content for undergraduates for sure. It's a total bridge to the journal literature. And it's sort of just different ways of thinking now about a new communication form.
Yeah, because like if you're a high school student and you are looking into something called neuroscience, you might look at your blog, and
Yes.
that might actually answer a legitimate question that someone in high school has. And there should be a way for that person to be able to accurately represent your blog in a standardized way.
Mm-hmm.
And it also teaches people how to be good researchers.
Yes.
To look at the credentials without having, someone doing
Right.
like curating a collection for you. So.
Exactly. It teaches you it teaches you discrimination, and how to identify bias, because even though they may be academically good, there's still bias, because there's opinion and commentary in them. Yeah. And actually, we have a subscriber from a fairly Tony high school outside of Philadelphia, where they're using our blog collection for AP students. Yeah.
In fact, there's one thing that you might already be implementing, but some websites have like badges and things like that, and it would be nice to have something like that and link it with some outreach program in high schools and colleges, so that if they come across a blog, like someone mentioned, how do you know that it's actually a good blog or not? You don't really, and even a badge like that could be faked, and there's all kinds of issues with that. But if you connect it with, say, a 10-minute orientation in high school saying, somebody's indexing this and they're trained, they don't necessarily look at every single blog post, but you can at least, you're not wasting your time if you look at it, kind of thing, because this is just a triage problem at every level of this whole thing. So.
Can I add that actually?
Please.
And this dovetails, I think, with the institutional question,
Right.
because we had Ms. Ann hosted an event at BU last fall where I brought together a bunch of people who are doing different things in the digital realm, and it's people who are blogging, people who are doing podcasts, and this sort of thing. And something that just kept coming up is something that I raised in my talk, which was, how do you convince institutions that what you're doing is legit? And we talked about not just creating these mechanisms of sort of like the seal of approval that for the general public, but how do you teach administrators and your colleagues to recognize these signs and think of what you're doing here as legit? Like how, and the consensus was actually that we needed to figure out ways to peer review podcasts, peer review sites. This is already starting to pop up where some journals have been publishing reviews of websites. But this was something we're within, at least within the humanities, where we need to figure out these mechanisms for promoting legitimacy of this kind of activity within the guild, right? So that's the flip side of that.
Yeah,
that
good
part.
point. Great point. Yeah.
If I may add one more thing, from the perspective of an indexing service, following citations is one of the criteria, one of the methods that allows us to identify content that might be relevant to our. So if you're serving the core astronomy community, things that are cited in the core refereed peer-reviewed literature are usually considered of interest to that community. But there's a lot of other things that you take into account. So the subject of the blog, the reputation of the author, including content that may not be 100% scholarly is something that we don't consider necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the worst that can happen is that you have some noise in an otherwise very astronomy-focused database. But through other metrics, blogs may be much more successful than a Nature article. Like, you can have blogs that get a lot of readership because the audience is much greater than the few specialized scientists that work on it. So the jury's out there. The question is, who are we trying to provide services for? Yeah.
Yeah, this is our next one. We're going to wrap up here.
Thank you, everyone. That was really thorough.
Thank you. I have a couple of books here that are examples of blogs, if anybody would